Well, welcome back to the 7 Steps of the Scientific Method and your science fair project, 5th grade science fair project. We did talk about our independent and dependent variables in class, and it sounded like we had a pretty good discussion. We got a pretty good handle on that. So we're going to move on now to the experiment. And John, after doing his observation research, doing some background stuff, setting up his hypothesis, he's ready to do his experiment now. So he goes to his teacher to help him come up with a procedure and list of needed materials. You could do this on your own. If you need some help, you are welcome to come to me. That's kind of what we'll be doing in our next couple classes, making sure that our procedure materials, you'll be working in groups and things to come up with these type of things, and list of needed materials that he's going to need in order to do this project. She discussed with John how to determine the control group. So here's a new definition that I'd like you to write down. It's right here, the control group. You can see it here. Okay, we want you to write that down into your notebook. So if you need to get your notebook out, go ahead. You can pause the video so that we can move on and come back to the video anytime. So I'm going to move on. If you want to push pause, go ahead. I'm just going to get rid of this ink. And we're going to go on to what a control group is. Because before we start our experiment, we have to have one of these in there. In a scientific experiment, the control is the group that serves as the standard of comparison. It's what we're going to compare all the changes to. Now, your control group can be many different things. It can be seen differently depending on what your experiment looks like. The control group may be a no treatment, meaning you're not going to do anything to it. If I was going to grow plants, and I wanted to test different liquids to see if they help the plant grow more, obviously the control group would probably be water, because that's what we always put in plants to help them grow. If I was going to be washing something with a detergent or soap or something, and I wanted to see which soap or detergent was the best, maybe I would wash the clothing or whatever it is in just water with no soap. And that would be my control group. So your control is just a control that serves as the standard, what we're going to compare everything else to. In John's case, his is going to be what his grandma normally uses, the amount of sugar that his grandma normally uses. That would be his control group. So that's where it comes into the experimenter selected group. Okay, so you have to have a control group in there, and we will define that in a little bit, and we'll figure out what our control group for ours is going to be. The control group is exposed to the same conditions. It's done just like all the rest of the experiments. You're going to test it exactly the same as you're going to do with everything else, except for the variable being tested. All experiments should have a control group, and that's key. You can see how all is underlined. Every one of your control group, or every one of your experiments, must have a control group in it. So make sure that you do have one of those in there. The last thing about your control group, and this is what he did. Because his grandmother always used 50 grams of sugar in her recipe, that's what he's going to use. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. Okay, there's one more, so that's kind of what control is. Remember, it's the one thing that we're comparing everything to. We're going to move on to one more definition today. And this will be one of our last definitions as we go through. And that is the word constants. So you can see it up here on the top. The word constants is right there. We're going to keep that up there. And John's teacher reminds him to keep all the other factors the same so that any observed changes in the bread can be attributed to the variation in the amount of sugar. So that means everything else that you use, everything, must be kept the same besides your independent variable. Your independent variable, remember the definition, is the thing that changes in your experiment. Everything else must stay the same. Okay, and that means everything. The amount of, in this case, the amount of time that the bread is cooked must stay the same, or baked must stay the same. The pans that are used must be the same. The oven that's used must be the same. So those are all the things. Everything you do, the recipe for the bread must be the same except for the amount of sugar. But everything else has to be the same in every loaf of bread that he were to bake and that he were to test. Okay? The constants in an experiment are all the factors that the experimenter attempts to keep the same. And again, we talked about that in a bunch of different things that are need to be kept the same. So we talked about some of these, and we're going to do these next time in class. We're going to come up with maybe what are some constants that you might need, what is the control group that you might need, and we're going to talk about those in class. So be prepared to come in with yours so that you can maybe show the other classes or the other kids in your group the class that or what you have for your constants and your control group. Okay?